November 25th. For 2 days, all I have asked of the universe was to stay forever immured from it, to see nothing, hear nothing, for myself. But this morning's newspapers have restored a healthy and instinctive exasperation at the substitute for first-hand observation offered by the printed word. Today the French are entering Strasbourg. Yesterday, it was the Americans entering Luxembourg. The day before, the French in Colmar. The day before that, King Albert in Brussels. And all this very true and profound emotion. For the return of the Belgian king to his capital is profoundly moving. And so, whether or not one has a doubt of its entire rightness, the return of the French to the lost provinces is frozen and imprisoned in phrases of conventional patriotic fervor. And the events forthwith appear to have been invented as stunts, bread and circuses to amuse and placate the weary peoples. It seems ironic that the very instrument which did most to create the moral alliance against Germany has so far discredited its own influence that one now scents dishonesty even where it is not. Take the Alsace-Lorraine question. During the war, one's French liberal and radical friends admitted freely that the issue was not black and white. H.B. was the only liberal I can remember who insisted that it was a question of flat justice, restoration of stolen property. I wonder what his response would be to a passage from Arthur Young, the famous 18th century English traveller, who, after a long journey in 1789, represents the French as the original offenders against justice. I found myself, to all appearance, in Germany. Here, not one person in 100 has a word of French. Looking at a map of France and reading histories of Louis XIV never threw his conquest or seizure of Alsace into the light which travelling into it did. To cross a great range of mountains, to enter a level plain inhabited by a people totally distinct and different from France, with manners, language, ideas, prejudices, and habits all different, made an impression of the injustice and ambition of such conduct much more forcible than ever reading had done. So much more powerful are things than words. Alsace is Germany, and the change great on descending the mountains. The moment you are out of a large town, all in this country is German. It was Rick who called my attention to these observations, because they tallied with his own when he was driving an ambulance in Alsace in 1916. He is a charming story of vieille demoiselle, old lady, with whom he lived at Bello, and her French flag hidden away for 44 years of secret loyalty. But he says that she was the only person of French speech and tradition in that town, and is very dubious whether the return of the French will be welcomed by the majority. The two Alsatian sisters among the pupil nurses, admirably and distinguishedly of the French tradition, do much to reassure me. Of course, one is sentimentally for France. Never did intellectual misgivings seem more ungracious. Daudet's La Dernière Classe made so deep an impression on me at the age of 13 that I was almost moved to tears last year in Alsace Reconquise, Regained, when I saw one of the old schoolmasters of before 1870 teaching the guttural-mouthed children their lessons in French. Yes, sentiment has won the day. Until one reads the sugary platitudes in the press. I was mentally damning the whole tribe of journalists when in walked LSG. Delighted to agree with me, but frankly glad to be back en civil, in civilian clothes, as one of them. I must say it is a pleasure to see somebody not in uniform. As correspondent of the survey for the conference, he has the real journalist's passion for nosing about the town, eating in odd places, standing on street corners and letting the winds of report blow through his ears, and then journeying to distant alleys to interview greasy individuals who would prove report false. Joho and Longuet and Merem are becoming his closest intimates. He brought me La Bataille, which avoids all mention of Strasbourg by featuring the peace program of the French working class as drawn up by the Confédération Générale du Travail, General Workers' Confederation, in accordance with Wilson's 14 points. The degree to which Wilson is trusted by French labor makes one fearful. Witness even the advertisements on the back page. One comrade offers envelopes adorned with the portrait of the great citizen Wilson, President of the Republic of the United States. No more expensive than the ordinary envelope. All our readers should try this useful, practical, and economical way of honoring the illustrious friend of France. Dr. M bursts in his uniform, with my X-ray pictures while LSG was still here, and found his worst suspicions of his patient's radicalism confirmed by the presence of a peculiarly disarming young man in a soft collar, with a socialist newspaper in one hand and a volume of Chinese poetry in the other. This welcome visitor of the free and inquiring spirit always brings me some book or other, as well as all sorts of goodies, which is just what you might expect of a man who is married and a pacifist. The doctor was very warm about the X-rays, beamed with such a boyish happiness that the fractures had knit, that I felt touched and reproached. But my left foot has dropped out of position and must be put into a plaster cast, with a hole large enough for dressings. Query suppressed by New England pride. How does the blessé feel when the foot is twisted back to a right angle with the leg? I shall know soon enough. Meanwhile, I nibble at Arthur Waley's versions of the ancient and sage Chinese, wondering dimly why they make me homesick for New York. I have it. They remind me of a picture I once saw at the British Museum, a Confucian sage, deep in meditation by a cataract on a high mountainside, and Herbert Crowley, sunk in meditation as deep over his long cigar, with his glass of milk beside him and the sound of many disputatious voices in his ears, is, at the New Republic lunch table, the very image of the Chinese sage. I had such a kind letter from Crowley today. The New Republic lunch table, for all its disconcerting qualities, is a place I'd like to be. November 26th. The milestones in hospital lives are not very conspicuous, but I am aware of having reached one today. Indeed, it lies very white and heavy in the bottom of my bed, a cast on my left leg. My room is the first on the downstairs corridor, so my journey on the stretcher cart to the examining room, which is just to the right of the front door, was very brief. The point is that, in spite of the bad results of the last journey, and in spite of the certainty of torture, I took it with anticipation, the anticipation of a new experience. And the glimpse I had of hospital geography gave me a sort of mental orientation with the outside world that I do not repudiate, as I did last time, now that I am back in my bed. I don't even repudiate the 2 YMCA men I saw engaged in patient absorption of the 15-cent magazines in the big reception room that opens with much glass on the garden. I merely noted that the species had not been changed by the armistice, unmistakable in flavor as a Russian novel or Italian spaghetti. Dr. M was in great spirits, and for once I was well enough to take the jokes. Dr. M was in great spirits, and for once I was well enough to like the jokes and the bustle. He kept his clever Spanish assistant, who looks like a soubrette, also as if she would knife a rival in the back with pleasure, very busy getting things ready, while the hearty English pupil nurse was dispatched to fetch me 40 drops. The doctor has a high regard for cognac. In fact, he administered 40 drops before as well as after the ordeal. I was, therefore, sufficiently braced to take in the odd expression on his face as he manipulated my poor foot, so he always refers to it. He looked like a little boy with his hand in a Christmas stocking, very uncertain of the value of the object he was going to fish out of the depths. Well, Dr. M pulled out not a mandarin orange, but a real present from Santa Claus. The ankle joint worked, excruciatingly, but actually. Whereupon he began to quote Falstaff so loud and joyously that I stifled my groans in sheer amazement, for my surgeon had not struck me as a Shakespearean personage. When the cast was safely on, the foot self-respectingly erect inside, and a large hole cut over the wound, he assured me, with his nicest smile, which I had never seen before, that if God is good, Miss O, greatly distressed by his blasphemy, I should have a useful leg yet. Swing it around your head any time you like now, he called after me as they trundled me off. A fear that I haven't dared express, even to myself, has, by the movement of that joint, been hauled out of the subconscious. Then there is this new light on Dr. M, as somebody who might become friendly and conversable during convalescence. Thus I do make terms, tonight, with my aching milestone. November 27th. A wonderful visitor this morning, Dr. Simon Flexner, who has been in France a few weeks on a Red Cross mission and learned by chance of my accident and whereabouts. I had never seen him in uniform. It admirably suits his bald, eagle-like head, his profile of a Roman senator. By some mistake he had been kept waiting in the reception room and had an autocratic taxi driver who allowed him just 20 minutes at the hospital on his conscience. What a nose the fellows have for newly arrived Americans. It takes an old Parisian like me to face them down. But every second he stole from the autocrat was infinitely precious to me. After so much of comradely and egotistic youth, so much of mere kindly war acquaintance in the shape of visitors, the sight of this sagacious and affectionate older friend made something stir in the depths of me. He did not pretend that I was a slightly ailing hostess in a salon to be addressed on general topics with crossed legs. He drew a chair beside me and took my hand, and it seemed that every bad hour in 6 poignant weeks was compensated by the sympathy and keen understanding in his eyes. He realized that he was making me homesick, for no amount of bluff can prevent him from knowing exactly how one feels, and left me a few consoling pictures to keep by me. Pictures of a country where white-clad scientists still stood by laboratory tables, disturbed by no more ominous rumblings than those of elevated trains, where in green-embowered academic halls the faces of young girls were still ravished by the dim enchantments of the fairy queen. He brought me back to France with a diverting account of his unexpected celebration of Armistice Night at a French hospital in the war zone, where he and Dr. Lambert had had to ask shelter, and were more than warmly welcomed for the sake of poliomyelitis. Of course, he extracted my whole story. That is one of his subtlest arts. And then, of course, he went. Wisdom tarries with us such a little while. Then we fall back into the depths of our own insufficiency, which we try to make as gallant as we can, so that wisdom may not be sorry it took a look at us. November 28th. 10 a.m. Enter Dr. M, hurried and professional, his white chemise shirt flapping against his military boots, followed by the usual trail of cigarette smoke and Miss G carrying a strange implement which turns out to be a plaster cutter. "I'm going to cut down your cast well below the knee." "My child." Blessé, aggrieved. "Just as it gets comfortable." "To make it more comfortable. There. Now try to bend your knee. You see, Colonel?" To Miss G. "Stiff as a ramrod. Now, you've got to bend it every day, no matter how it hurts. If not, the Colonel and I shall anesthetize you and do it forcibly. By the time that great and good man President Wilson, who I swear I disown even if I am a Southerner, arrives to ennuyer, bore Monsieur Clemenceau, I expect you to be able to rest your chin on it." Exit en coupe de vent, a gust of wind, quickly, leaving Miss O and me to the new morning occupation of knee-bending. At 11 comes Colonel Lambert with his blend of the Roosevelt Mephistophelian, square, burly shoulders that deny the implications of his dark, pointed beard and snapping brown eyes. He carries a large bunch of Parma violets, hoping in their delicious perfume to disguise the bitter flavor of his news. He has his orders and is sailing in December. The words are scarcely out before R.M. follows him in, looking grave under her Red Cross hat because she has the same news. She is going home for Christmas. My two chief Paris props knocked out from under me at the same time. It does make me feel lightheaded for a moment. Not only that they have been so perfect in kindness, kept such a constant, responsible eye upon me ever since I drove up to the FSC in that midnight ambulance. What hits me harder, I believe, is the idea that the American Red Cross can run without these two high authorities, for that means that the war is over. Psychologically. Physically, it has been over for some 16 days. But in fact, its images and symbols have, if my head and the heads of my visitors are any indication, continued completely to preoccupy us. Now the readjustment has come. The clock of destiny is about to strike the hour that will banish from the Paris stage the servitors of war. The peacemakers, waiting impatiently for the signal to take their places, will make no bones of turning the war workers into the streets. A new hotel requisitioned every day. The bumptiousness of them, after we have saved Paris, say the war workers. Far better to go, as these two perspicacious people are doing, before the era with which they have been so deeply associated ends and the character of Paris changes. I long to go, too. Considering the intensity of my own connection with the war period, it is a strange fate that will keep me skewered to a bed on the periphery of the peace conference while, one by one, my wartime friends are off to the USA. The era of the war and the Hôtel de France est Choisil. Never again shall we all sit in that courtyard under a glass roof pierced by shrapnel, drinking caustic coffee served by the lugubrious Charles and sugared from our personal stores, while the stars prick patterns in the deep purple of the sky, and in a yellow window square a typewriter begins to tap. Tap, tap, tap. Come in to work. No, another 10 minutes. There will be a raid by that time. Besides, Colonel Lambert is reporting some inside gossip from GHQ. Mr. Ford has details about the devastated regions. Mrs. Ford and Mrs. Lambert are discussing the latest freaks in behavior in women war workers. One of the Rockefeller doctors draws up a chair to tell how the sub-prefect of a certain department took him fishing for shrimps. It is done with beefsteak, in the interests of tuberculosis. And Gertrude pauses long enough in a dash from the street, where she has been picking up a lost private and finding him a night's lodging, to the room where 6 YMCA workers with grievances have been champing for several solid hours to relate an anecdote of a submarine Negro stevedore. I tell you, miss, all I ask of this year war is that I shall be a survivor. The FAC without the Lamberts. Inconceivable. They should, on their departure, be presented with a set of souvenirs. A square of prehistoric red carpet, a bronze and gold empire clock under a glass case, and spécialité de la maison, cru de monsieur le propriétaire, specialty of the house, from the owner's vineyard, a dozen bottles of that ineffable and heady golden wine of Touraine. Evening. The pain again. I feel as if my left leg were being squeezed in one of the iron boots of the Inquisition. I feel as if my left leg were being squeezed in one of the iron boots the Inquisition invented for purposes of torture. I wish Madame F.T. hadn't come on a day of pain, a day of souvenirs and departures. Yet perhaps that was the right time, for her heart and mind are still sore with war and grief. Her mother, who was very ill during my last long stay with her in the country, died just after my accident. She sat down quietly beside me in the darkened room. But there is something nobly unresigned in this Frenchwoman, who carries her head with a poise that few women achieve. The more bonds that life puts upon her, the more she constrains herself to resignation and quietude. The blacker the veil which drapes that head, the more unquiet the essence of the spirit. The more gorgeous the gleam of the red hair and white skin through the veil. I could lie here forever and look at her. Her first words take me straight back to November 11th. Ah, cher ami, dear friend, you are fortunate not to have seen Paris on the day of the armistice. You who love Paris. It was dreadful. What disillusion in this poor, petty human nature, which reacts so basely from its fine emotions. How can you Protestants put the confidence you do in the human will? It has no strength at all when the mysterious force of life reasserts itself. I saw her spurning the streets, scorching the pageantry and the easy détente with those fierce violet eyes. Think what the war has been to my family alone, one of the least afflicted. Your family? I do think of it constantly, and with gratitude as I lie here. In its two perfect settings, in the old house on the quay with the poplars along the Seine, crinkling their leaves under the windows, the house where two broad streams of French tradition, Catholic and Protestant, literary and artistic, mingle so happily. In the little half-timbered country house next your mother's above the valley near Versailles, where you have welcomed me to a still more intimate and gracious rusticity. A family always, in spite of its simplicity of heart, in spite of its hospitality to all sorts and conditions of men and opinions. Chez moi, you once said to me, c'est tout ce qu'il y a de plus salade. At home, that's all there is to salad. Looking down on the world with the remoteness of achieved perfection. Always bathed in the most golden light of France, until the war turned the whole French sky lurid. I think especially of a night at the end of May, 6 months ago, when you and I sat up far into the small hours. We are in your husband's study, which seems, even by day, detached from the material universe. A spot of perfect peace and isolation, such as writers dream, but never possess out of France, opening with a great window and suspended as by a mysterious cord let down from the sky, above your deep, somnolent veil. Tonight the valley is dark, only a gleam from the moon on the roof of an old chateau, the spire of the village church, only one earthly light, the yellow eye of the Gare train station. But into the room flows a strong, intermittent pulsation, the guns of the front, nearer, more insistent every hour. And so you are packing a few things, your beautiful household linen, your husband's books. Now and then you pause in your investigation of one of his cupboards to show me your daughter's first sketchbook. That certainly must go in. The child had an extraordinary gift for caricature. The last birthday gift of your younger brother, killed in early September 1914, before his poor little wife had even had a letter from him, several months before the birth of his child. If only that cuckoo would stop, waked perhaps by the guns he is mocking and calling in the dark tops of your ancient trees, and the scent of roses and heliotrope floating on puffs of warm wind. Standing at the window, I hear a new sound against the reverberation of cannon. A rumbling, a squeak of brakes, a shrill whistle, a troop train. Slowly it winds its caterpillar way up the dreaming valley, breaking the white mist with a heavier column of white smoke. How many times in the last 4 years, you say, from your knees on the floor, my second brother has traveled through our valley with his big guns on a train like that, on his way to a new sector, just seeing the tops of our roof and my mother's. Sometimes he manages to send up a line by the chef de gare, station master. I lunched with them both on the quay in 1912, I remember, when he was a successful young novelist and a delicate pression dandy instead of an artillery officer. The number of images and thoughts that can flash through one's head in 2 minutes. F is in Alsace, you know, goes on my visitor. He is sending you a letter about it. It's been a very great emotional experience, a sort of compensation for all his disintegrating war service of the rear. So your husband, my black-bearded friend, comes to join us. I see him wandering like a lost soul in his Paris library on one of his leaves, seeking, for his generous, curious intelligence must always be seeking, the significance of Wilson, discussing at lunch the implications of the American intervention. But the sort of lucid searching and fine-spun deducing to which his mind is accustomed is bustled and deadened by the material conditions in which it must work, and still more by preoccupation with the destiny of France. To him, the personal cost of the war is, I believe, a very subtle cost in intellectual freedom. Your boy, coming in from his lycée, high school, to take his place at the lunch table, absurdly like his father, complains of a loss in intellectual stimulus. All his teachers are so weary and so dull and so old. The young, vital ones are dead or fighting. Your daughter has no complaints to make as she starts out for her war work, with her wavy, willowy gait. She is more than half your age, for you were married at 17, and is a bloom like a peach, and lips red as midinettes cannot make them with all the rouge of the galerie. Her dress has a nuance of the more romantic era of those two grandmothers who have been, perhaps, her closest friends. She loves to nurse refugee babies and do up bundles for prisoners. She loves to write letters. Yes, I have looked up and seen her many a time bending her small, mottled head on its slim neck over her writing table in the window, where she sits like an enchanted princess under the treetops. It is you who sigh that she doesn't know what she is missing, that the years from 16 to 20 are normally the only gay and irresponsible ones in a French girl's life. She has spent those years in such anxious and elderly society, never to meet a young man save on a leave, with the doom of death ahead. If you knew, ma chère, the recalcitrant thoughts I have dug into my carrot patch. I do know, for I have watched you digging, with fury and determination. Gardening has been the chief of your war work, with the adoption into your family of some young refugees. You have a native gift with peasant boys, as well as with carrots and bees and goats. Yet only an aristocrat can wear sabots, clogs, as you do. And shall I ever forget the day of rich September when, in a moment of joy, standing in the midst of the wartime flock you had settled in your rose garden, you suddenly, laughing, seized your old ram by the beard and drew him prancing like Capricorn on an antique coin across the terrace, while the sun burnished your copper hair and the young kids skipped about you? Can that be only 2 months ago? The face under the black veil is tragic. She is preparing to go, regretting that she lives so far, asking what books and food she can send me. And she has a last word. Whenever, during these 4 years, I took a train, I used to wish I might go on traveling, on and on, never stopping till the nightmare was over. But now it is over, I have no sense of reaching a goal. Wherever one looks, blackness and devastation. No doubt the separation has been hard for American wives and mothers, but how brief! And your men go back to an untouched country. Forgive me, she added, squeezing my hand. I am violent and passionate. At least I used to be passionate. I am still violent, and I revolt. She is gone, and I think of my morning visitors. It is true that 6 months from now, Dr. Lambert will be so plunged in his recovered practice that his 2 years and a half of wartime Paris will seem a dream. RM will again be using the resources that have so finely served the Red Cross in New York civic activities. And New York won't look or feel very different. But the house on the quay, though no bomb pierced the roof, and the house over the valley, though the linen and the souvenirs d'enfance, childhood memories, are back in their cupboards, will be changed. The golden light that bathed them and gave your spirits their special ease and limpidity before 1914 has vanished.